Thank you for being here. My name is Andrei Boz. I'm a security researcher with 27 years of experience. My first encounter with malware happened in 1992 with the Hive virus when me and my friends were infected while playing a pirated video game, Wolfenstein. Back then, I had no idea what a virus was. There was no antivirus because we had no access to internet, etc. So I had to understand what's happening and code something like a disinfector, as we used to call it back then. And this was the beginning of an awesome journey to me. In 2010, I became a consultant for the Romanian National Cyber Emergency Response Team. And at some point, someone alerted us on a potential breach, but they had no evidence of the attack in the IDS logs or firewall logs, but they were pretty sure there was an incident happening. Actually, one of their partners caught fraudulent activity originating from their private VPN network. But on their side, nothing suspicious raised any alarms. So we started investigating, and we observed that there was no direct service attacks, no spear phishing attacks, but forensic analysis on the memory of the device was revealed to us that...
Can you guys be a bit quiet in the back? Thank you.
Revealed to us that what happened was a drive-by download, aka watering hole. Back then, I had no idea what the watering hole was. Maybe you guys know what the watering hole is. But Wikipedia says that the watering hole is a computer attack that attacks a particular group, organization, industry, or region. And the attacker either guesses or observes which website the group uses and infects one or more of them, of these websites with malware. More than 70% of the websites are vulnerable. So it's pretty easy to an attacker to find either known vulnerability or a zero-day vulnerability that he can exploit in order to get access on a website, on a legitimate website that he can infect. So basically, this is how watering hole attack looks. These are the phases. Phase one, the victims are lured either by spear phishing or by simply browsing to an infected website. The victims are fingerprinted based on their IP address, their browser, or other technologies they use. And the victims of interest are selected and redirected to an exploitation server where they are attacked based on information previously gathered. Not interesting victims get access to the legitimate website. Basically, these are the phases of the watering hole attack. Phase one, attacker profiles victims and the kind of website they go to. Attacker then tests these websites for vulnerabilities. When the attacker finds a website that he can compromise, he injects JavaScript or HTML, redirecting the victim to a separate site that hosts exploit code for the chosen vulnerability. The step four is the compromised website is now waiting to infect the profile victim with a zero-day exploit, just like a lion waiting at the watering hole. We can see here that a watering hole attack can happen either through a normal website that serves a malicious advertisement, or through a compromised website, or even through a spam link, aka spear phishing. The victim accessing these resources gets into a traffic direction system that sends him to an exploitation server kit that in turn serves either ransomware, banking trojans, malware, cryptojacking, ransomware, etc. So basically, the watering hole attack is considered a very dangerous but not so common attack. But the problem is most victims don't even notice they have been attacked, as you will see later, because there is no obvious infection vector. For instance, With spear phishing, you can see that someone received an email. With direct services attack, you can see that someone attacked a service and left a signature in the IDS logs or something like this. During forensic investigations on high-profile networks in Romania, we found multiple occurrences of successful watering hole attacks, and most of these victims had state-of-the-art security solution in place. Let's see how watering hole attacks appear in the news. We see that apparently a Chinese attack group infected Forbes.com back in November 2015 in a watering hole attack, and they targeted visitors working in the financial service or defense industries. If you look at the second paragraph, they state that the attack exploited two zero-day vulnerabilities, one in Microsoft Internet Explorer and the other one in Adobe Flash Player. And the Adobe fixed the flaw back in December, and Microsoft updated Internet Explorer as part of its Patch Tuesday release. So basically, there was no signature for the admin guys to identify that someone was attacking their systems. Also, what's very important to notice is the next paragraph saying that the campaign lasted only a few days, but Eyesight and Invincia did not rule out the possibility of the campaign lasting a longer period of time. They had no idea to know that. Another very important watering hole attack attacked people working at Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft. This happened in 2013, and the attackers compromised the mobile app developers forum. As you can see, Apple confirmed being hit in a recent watering hole attack. Many watering holes targets in hacks that netted Facebook, Twitter, and Apple. And apparently, not only one web app developers forum was targeted, but in fact, two or three other forums were hosting watering holes. And they say those other watering holes served almost identical attacks to employees from a wide range of target firms across industries, including prominent auto manufacturers in US government agencies, and even a leading candy maker. So nobody is safe from watering holes. Another very interesting attack happened in 2017, in February. Banks, 31 banks in Poland had been affected by a watering hole. The watering hole was served from the Polish Financial Supervision Authority. It was a legitimate website where people working in the banking industry had to browse on a daily basis to be on point and to be up to date with the latest recommendations and regulations from the Polish government. What's interesting is the second paragraph, saying that as indicators of compromise and attack were shared by the affected banks, other institutions around the world found that they have been hit as well. So you can assume that a bank can have state-of-the-art security products in place, but still they didn't see the attacks happening until someone else shared with them the IOCs of a certain attack. This kind of raises some suspicions. Why didn't they see that in the logs? Why didn't the IDS raise any alarms? We also see that the watering hole are a very favorite attack vector in APT groups. They more recently in 2018, apparently Ocean Lotus had attacked like 21, 25 websites in Southeast Asia, and amongst them the Ministry of Defense of Cambodia, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Cambodia, and several Vietnamese newspaper and blog websites. As Anup Ghosh, the CEO and founder of a security company Invincia, said, how can we train employees to be wary of watering hole sites? It doesn't make any sense, and I can just see why some CISOs are getting frustrated. At least with spear phishing, you can blame the user even if it's not their fault. With watering hole attacks, they can always say, I had to go there for work, what do you want me to do? And he has a point. He had to do that for his day-to-day activities. I would like to introduce you to now some case studies. Case study one is called the bank. In 2017, one Romanian bank contacted us for investigating a suspected breach. Basically, one major ATM network identified suspicious operations originating from bank's private VPN during out-of-work hours using legitimate credentials. Those legitimate credentials pertain to a user who was kind of computer illiterate. He had no security training. He had no idea how to hack. And the manager of the bank told me it's impossible that he attacked those people. We need to see what was going on there. Plus, the bank recently acquired a state-of-the-art monitoring and detection solution from a major vendor. And no suspicious activities were detected by the bank's state-of-the-art intrusion detection sensors and firewalls within the past 2 months. We asked them to provide us with the firewall logs for the past 2 months, and we didn't see any suspicious going on there. In plus, latest patches and updates were in place, but forensic analysis on the computer who generated the suspicious behavior didn't reveal any direct service or spear phishing attacks, but the memory of the device held a lot of evidence pointing to a watering hole attack. So basically, you can see here, we dumped the memory. We simply searched through the memory with strings for the string iframe. We anonymized some watering hole sites on there, but we left others. Some of them might still be active, but this happened on a single bank computer. So, performing further analysis on that computer, we actually were able to narrow down the websites he recently browsed. And we started the DEKENEAS scan on those websites, and we found the culprit. The culprit was a Romanian NGO dedicated to cybersecurity in banking environment. Those dudes were posting recommendations, how security operations managers in banks should implement best practices, so to say. So it was quite visited by people working in the bank responsible for security of the banks. And we, in fact, identified that certain pages were implanted with malicious JavaScript. DEKENEAS found that. The malicious JavaScript was used to redirect users to an exploitation server. And the exploitation server was using Flash and PDF 0 days. So basically, this was the reason why nothing appeared in the logs and no suspicions were raised. You see here on the left side of the screen, this is a redirection script extracted from the NGO. Nothing suspicious if you look with the naked eye. Nothing suspicious if you analyze with an antivirus. But as soon as you perform a first step of decoding, we can see that actually the JavaScript was referencing functions through a vector instead of directly calling the functions. He encoded the function's name in hex, so signature scanning would identify nothing suspicious going on there. Further, the URL string was also encoded, so nothing suspicious when you perform regular signature scanning. The other script looked like this, which was basically an eval executing this harmless-looking thing. Nothing suspicious here, if you don't know what you're looking for. But if you decode this, it's actually decoded to this JavaScript, which you can see. Actually, it implants in the HTML document a new script with an encoded string as a source for the URL of the redirection. Basically, the firewalls and the antiviruses had no chance to identify that those scripts were performing anything illegal in this case. So, as I said, certain pages in the website had separate implements of these scripts, especially the pages where they were posting regularly recommendations and best practices for the banks. Only pages that were of direct interest to people working in the security management in the financial sectors. As you saw, multi-layered encryption was used as protection against static analysis. All those implants redirected to the same exploitation server, and the server was serving actually PDF and Flash 0 days that after successful exploitation would download the previously unknown Carbanak rootkit variant. Carbanak is a very known cyber criminal group that is said to have been frauding the financial industry for a few years for like $2 billion or something like this. Another interesting case study, it was a major media network in Romania. We titled this From Malware to Crypto Checking, because as part of our regular activities, we perform regular DEKENEAS scans on Romanian top 100 websites. And one time, one scan revealed an interesting watering hole attack on a major media network. This particular media network totaled almost 30 websites with 500,000 unique visitors per day. It was huge. It's, I think it's the biggest in Romania. And one of their 3 load balancers was infected with watering hole implants. What's interesting though, it's the fact that instead of redirecting users to an exploitation server, the JavaScript would redirect users to a cryptojacking domain. So basically, something like 200,000 users were mining cryptocurrencies for attackers every day. And this was very hard to detect because it didn't happen all the time. Not all load balancers was infected. It was like 1 out of 3 hits was mining cryptocurrencies for the attackers. Also, the cryptojacking script was carefully crafted not to use too much CPU power in order to avoid the detection. So usually people detect cryptojacking because the resources, the CPU, etc., go up the roof, and they notice something fishy is going on, and they start investigating further. In this case, nothing as such. So people would happily mine cryptocurrencies for the attackers, unsuspecting anything. As a side note, we concluded somehow that a recent trend is to replace the traditional ransomware attacks with cryptojacking, because instead of forcing someone to pay you a certain sum for their files, you can much more easy have them mine cryptocurrency on your behalf without their consent. This is how the cryptojacking script would look. As you can see, again, nothing suspicious, nothing that could raise any suspicions to an antivirus product or a firewall. This is the decoded version of the script on the right. Still, multi-layered encryption. Nothing suspicious, again, for the firewall or the antivirus. But still, this attacked a lot of users, and nobody noticed that the attack was ongoing. Most common payloads that can be served in watering hole attacks are Trojans, APT rootkits, cryptojacking, ransomware, or spyware. The traditional methods that should detect watering hole attacks are signature scanning, blacklisting of IPs or other resources, static code analysis, and dynamic code analysis. Why these methods fail? As we have seen previously, there are a lot of high-profile networks that were compromised using watering hole attacks. And as you can imagine, these places had state-of-the-art technology that was supposed to protect them, but the technology failed. So why these technologies fail? First, the code is obfuscated, and the code is totally deobfuscated only in the browser memory. As you have seen earlier, the code doesn't look suspicious and doesn't perform any redirects, doesn't perform any implants until it reaches the browser's memory. So in transit, everything looks fine. Also, another problem is that the code is rarely reused from one watering hole to another. So it's basically impossible to generate a signature that can be used in multiple places. For instance, how is the case with traditional viruses? Like, you have this virus, you know the signature will catch every infection with that virus. In this case, the code is rarely reused, and most of the times looks different from one infection to another. Another problem is that the exploitation server uses either zero-day attacks that are totally unknown, as you have seen previously in the press excerpts I presented, or one-day attacks that are recently published, but nobody generated yet a signature to detect those attacks. Also, the domains and the IP addresses used in attacks as a command and control center, etc., are rarely reused. They don't get blacklisted, and most of the times they are legitimate and trustworthy websites that simply also serve as a command and control server for the attackers. So you cannot blacklist a legitimate domain, because this is rather impossible. Also, what is very deterrent for the analysts is the fact that only certain IP addresses are attacked. For instance, in the case of the Polish banks, they had a list of the IP addresses used by the banks they wanted to target, and all the IP addresses who didn't fall in their list were redirecting to the normal website, and no attack happened. So if an analyst tried to understand what was going on, and he didn't run the analysis from one IP addresses that was in the targeted list, he would practically see nothing weird, nothing suspicious. Also, only certain browsers and underlying technologies are attacked. So, for instance, if they have a 0-day for Internet Explorer, they will not attack you if you use Firefox or Chrome, for instance. If they have a 0-day for Firefox, they will not attack you unless you're using Firefox. So the analyst has to know from the beginning what kind of setup he has to make in order to be attacked so he can trigger and analyze the attack. Another big problem is the fact that the communication with the command and control server is done using covered channels. For instance, as a side note, the Carbanak rootkit variant we analyzed used to communicate on HTTPS with legitimate website, and the exfiltration and communication was done through base64 hashed cookies. So basically, to anyone looking in the logs, this would look like someone was surfing the web, nothing suspicious was going on there. Also, as I stated previously, the command and control server is not blacklisted because it can be a legitimate website, a legitimate server that at this point in time serves as a command and control server for certain attackers. Also, during analyzing malicious HTML implants samples, we identified that they use a lot of tricks and techniques to identify an instrumentation environment. For instance, they have delayed execution. The script doesn't actually execute unless a certain amount of time has passed. They look for signs of human interaction. They look for on mouse over or mouse activity, keyboard activity, etc. They have techniques to identify virtual machine detection. For instance, they check the window size. There are very rare cases when the analyst actually changes the, the window size of the analysis environment, and this is practically a standard window size for all cases. And hackers look at this, and they can decide if it's an instrumentation environment or it's a real person who accessed and who is getting infected. Also, a variant would be dynamic code analysis. But the problem is that dynamic code analysis is very time consuming and is time limited. You can only analyze a sample for a certain amount of time, like 2 minutes. But the hackers could make their script run after 2 minutes. So during your analysis, nothing suspicious, nothing raises any alarms. So you say, okay, it was a false alarm. This site is perfectly okay. But in fact, it is not. Also, dynamic code analysis is time-consuming, and it will require from a few tenths of seconds to a few minutes for a complete analysis. So analyzing a single simple website would take hours. This is not feasible in a real environment. So as we already saw, there are a few phases in a watering hole attack. Basically, it's the redirecting phase, where users are selected and fingerprinted based on technologies they use. Using the information gathered in the redirecting phase, they are served certain exploits according to the technologies they use. And the third phase is the persistency phase, in which the actual attacker tries to hold control of the equipment he recently owned and tries to call back home to his command and control server. Most technologies that protect against watering holes focus on the exploitation phase or the persistency phase, which you can see it's rather difficult when the attack is performed using 0 days. They attempt to detect exploit signatures, blacklisted IP addresses, or suspicious communications. But this protection is not enough against 0-day or 1-day attacks, or legitimate IP addresses used as command and control servers, or covered channels, as we have seen in the example with the Romanian bank, where a legitimate web server was used as the command and control server, and the exfiltration and communication was performed through cookie values. So we understood that we had to come up with a new approach, a different approach. I started developing DEKENEAS in 2016 as a complex passive scanner using artificial intelligence to classify malicious HTML elements. Our focus was on detecting phase 1, the redirection and fingerprinting of users, instead of trying to identify blacklisted IPs or exploit signatures, etc. We developed DEKENEAS as a big data system, which allows parallel processing in a big data environment, which in turn allows us to analyze something like 1 million URL addresses in 24 hours, which is basically huge. Also, we introduced a new concept, which is a hybrid between static analysis and dynamic code analysis, which we call contextual analysis, which means basically understanding the code from its semantics, not running the actual code, and not only looking for certain patterns in that code, but actually trying to find the correlations and relations between the HTML instructions or the JavaScript instructions, and see how those features, those instructions fit into a malicious behavior or not. This approach allowed us to have no false negatives. Basically, there is no malicious JavaScript that we did not detect, but we had some false positives, like 0.001% of the websites we analyzed were in fact legitimate scripts looking like malicious ones. But these false positives are used to train further the artificial intelligence algorithm. So, our research, we analyzed over 20,000 malicious HTML elements, and we identified certain features that are common amongst all samples. Those features are fundamental in order for the implant to perform. And those features are redirection. You need to send the users to the exploitation server. You need to actually implement and execute that redirection through some of keywords or instructions. But this would be very obvious for an admin guy, and he could easily see that someone implanted an iframe or a meta refresh tag in his website. So they had to obfuscate and conceal the presence of such keywords or instructions that would perform the redirection. Also, another feature is that they need to fingerprint the target, the victims. They need to understand what technologies the victims use in order to redirect them to the appropriate exploitation server. Also, as we stated previously, they have instructions that try to detect the instrumentation environment. So basically, knowing these features, we try to identify the instructions and the keywords that would allow an attacker to perform these actions. We identified basically the code constructs that would perform these features. Um, and actually, as I was stating earlier, we don't look for certain instructions, but actual code constructions, how the semantics are used, and where the instructions are placed in the script or HTML page, and how that might affect the specifics of that certain DOM. For instance, to perform redirection, the attacker needs either meta refresh tags, iframes, location href, window open, etc. To execute the redirection, the attacker needs instructions such as document write, eval, etc. To perform obfuscation, the code needs to cycle through large chunks of data and apply transformations on the data. Basically, to conceal the fact that they attack the users of a website, they need to encrypt that. To decrypt that, they need to have a very large chunk of so-called trash that would get transformed in such a way that is easily interpreted by the JIT of the certain browser, so that it totally makes sense, but it doesn't raise any suspicions. So we decided to score large variables, or many variables, or large function parameters. We score transformation instructions such as charcode@, from charcode, unescape, etc. But this is just an example. There are many more. Also, the score increases a lot if they are present inside loops. For instance, if there is a cycle that applies transformations, we try to take into account how big the cycle is, and as big the cycle is, the higher score it gets. The score also increases if there are multiple instances of transformation instructions. For instance, in order to apply multi-layered encryptions, they use certain different instructions in the same code. If we see many transformation instructions in the same code, or many iteration instructions in the same code, we increase the scoring. Also, we're looking for delayed execution instructions, such as set timeout, or instructions expecting user interaction, such as on mouse over, on mouse click, or on mouse leave. These instructions are very useful for an attacker to identify if it's an analysis system or an actual user who browsed the website. We also score instructions checking for user agent or other features that could give the attacker an idea on what technologies are used on the certain browser, and how they can exploit the user that access the watering hole. Also, we're checking for instructions that look for the local IP address, either the internal IP address or the external IP address. There are very many cases when this is only used to communicate with the command and control server, saying, okay, this IP address is of interest or not. Okay, let it go. So we take that into account when we analyze the JavaScript or the HTML. Also, we're looking for instructions, for instance, looking for the window size. As we stated previously, the window size is used to determine, as one factor used to determine if the analysis environment is present or if it's a normal user browsing the website. Also, we score certain other features that we have seen in the malicious JavaScript, such as concatenation. We also score encoding of payloads, as we have seen earlier. There was encoded with hex, etc. We also score white spaces because in malicious JavaScript, there are not so many white spaces, but in legitimate JavaScript, usually there are a lot of white spaces because this is one of the way the JavaScript should look. We also score the new lines inserted in each JavaScript. Also, we score shellcode looking snippets. We also can identify attacks on the Java compiler through this approach. And everything gets compiled in a data set with more than 30 features. And all these features are unique to malicious HTML elements. There are cases when legitimate HTML elements or scripts might use some of these features, but not in the correlations present in the data set. For instance, there might be some legitimate scripts that perform the obfuscation, for instance, in the contact pages or something like this, but the length of the decoded string is not as large as it is in the case of a watering hole attack. The resultant data set is fed to a random forest classification algorithm because a random forest uses a collection of trees with a random parameter holdout to build models, which in many cases outperforms individual decision trees. This gives us increased analysis speed, so we can analyze like 1 million URLs in 24 hours. Also, the HTML elements flagged as suspicious by the artificial intelligence are sent to a JavaScript instrumentation sandbox. Basically, the artificial intelligence acts as a filter to distinguish the potential suspicious elements from benign ones, so that the actual dynamic code analysis is performed only on elements that are showing great signs of maliciousness. And in parallel, they are sent to a JavaScript instrumentation sandbox, which interprets every instruction and tries to emulate it. But at the same time, they are sent to a high interaction honeypot, which executes the HTML page or the JavaScript and looks for changes in the analysis system. Actually, it's possible to integrate the results flagged by the artificial intelligence with any online or offline sandbox or analysis system. And HTML elements flagged as suspicious but not confirmed by the instrumentation sandbox or honeypot are submitted for manual analysis by a human analyst, so that he can decide, okay, this is something actually weird going on there, or no, this is totally banning, let it go. And as soon as the false positive is detected, that false positive is used to further train the artificial intelligence algorithm. So we started DEKENEAS in 2016, and after 2 years, DEKENEAS became a startup, part of the Orange Fab Startup Accelerator. We did not foresee that at some point someone would show this great interest to DEKENEAS, but we have, since November 2018, we have had a lot of requests to use our services. Thank you, guys. This was my presentation.